When considering the issue of recognition and reward, one first has to be very deliberate about the leader and where the leader places her attention. A leader can either place her attention on what she's getting, or she can place her attention on what she's giving. Now, if the leader were to recognize and reward somebody in order to motivate them, that's clearly concerned with an outcome that the leader is trying to get, because she wants to get the person to do more. And similarly, if she said, I recognize and reward you to motivate you, it is a similar thing. You're trying to produce an outcome, or she's trying to produce an outcome. So it is only when the leader says that I recognize and reward you in appreciation for what you've done, that she's actually now giving attention to what she's giving. So in the first instance, one must be very careful not to equate recognition and reward with the intent to motivate people or to produce outcomes. It is really about the intent to be fair. Now, when one considers the whole issue of empowerment and how the issue of fairness relates to the issue of empowerment, we have our fishing example. You want to empower somebody to fish, you give them all the means they could require, you give them the tools, the resources, the authority and the information and so on. You teach them how to be able to fish and why they should fish. But after this, if you then give a person the fish, they're not going to be very committed to fishing. So you then also have to hold the person accountable. You've got to say to them, if you don't catch a fish after this, starve. And exactly the same categories would then also be appropriate in a corporate context. Now, this issue of accountability is nonsense if you don't consider the issue of standards, which kind of suggests that somebody's performance is either above standard or below standard, and they can be above standard in one of two ways. They're either going the extra mile or they're careful to act to the standard that you specified, or they can be below standard because they're either deliberately doing what's wrong, they're malevolent, or they're careless. Our view is that if the person has gone the extra mile, you should reward them. If they're careful, you should recognize them. If they're malevolent, you should punish them. And if they're careless, you should censure them. So therefore, this instrument actually defines what it means to be fair when you're assessing somebody's performance. In the first instance, it says there's a logical order here. First, you've got to ask yourself if the person had the means or the ability to do what's required of them. And then if that is the case, you then say, well, if they had, then you hold the person accountable. Your first port of call is then to ask, has the person gone the extra mile? And then you'd reward them, or have they done what's required of them, in which case you'd recognize them. With regard to the issue of recognition and reward, it is important to understand that you can make one of two mistakes. You can make either a hard mistake or a soft mistake. And the hard mistake is not to recognize and reward somebody who's gone the extra mile but has not achieved the required result. The soft mistake is to recognize and reward people for a result, irrespective of what they personally have done. Now, of these two mistakes, the hard mistake and the soft mistake is infinitely worse. And it is because it produces a culture of short-term thinking and the cutting of corners. If you're only going to be interested in the result, then I'm going to do whatever I need to do to cosmetically affect the scoreboard. It therefore suggests that if you look at the intent that sits behind producing both the soft and the hard mistake, it is about the pursuit of outcomes. The intent that produces both the soft and the hard mistake is the intent to produce a predictable outcome. And what we're suggesting here is that the intent that protects one from both the soft and the hard mistake is the intent to be fair. When you are disciplining somebody, and when you are recognizing and rewarding somebody, when you're dealing with anything relating to the issue of accountability, what you're actually concerned with is fairness. The fairness in positive accountability is to consistently recognize carefulness and reward people going the extra mile. Now, if we were to therefore apply the instrument, we have a leadership standard for dealing with performance, and you'll notice that right at the outset, you're assuming that people are doing things right. So you're assessing the person's performance against a standard, and the first thing you ask yourself is, has the person gone the extra mile? And if this is the case, you'll reward them. And then you ask yourself, has the person been careful? In which case you recognize them. In other words, you start off the process by assuming that somebody's done what's right. And the reason why it's appropriate to start off with this is just to consider the following. are more things going right than wrong in your organization? And surely if more things were going wrong than right, then your organization would no longer be functioning. Your business would go out of business. Insofar as you are functioning, it has to mean that more things are going right than wrong. It therefore has to mean that by and large, that of the two, discipline and recognition and reward actually should be what happens most frequently. In other words, you set off trying to catch people doing things right when you're dealing with the issue of accountability. And that also suggests that we need to consider what this means with regard to competition. And the first thing one needs to understand is that one should not set up competition in such a way so that there's a ranking of people based on win-lose. People should compete against objective criteria, which creates the conditions where potentially everybody can be the winner. This thing of setting people up as in win-lose engagements in a team is poison for a team. You actually get people doing as much to set their colleagues up to fail than what they rather do to set themselves up to succeed. And the last question I think we need to consider is that, of the two sort of principal qualities that a leader should evidence, generosity and courage, which one of these two is actually most at issue when you're trying to recognize and reward people fairly? And actually, it's courage. And the reason for this is that when you recognize and reward people, there is an implicit need to justify what you are doing to the people who you're not recognizing or rewarding. In other words, it takes courage to be fair, both with the disciplinary part of accountability and the recognition and reward part of accountability.